This week, Conflict Zone is at the Munich Security Conference, where some of the world's best-known power brokers have assembled. My guest is the former head of Saudi intelligence, Prince Turki Al-Faisal. After Donald Trump referred to Saudi Arabia as the world's biggest funder of terrorism, what chance of meaningful discussions between Riyadh and Washington? Prince Turki Al-Faisal, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you very much. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Let me take you back to last May when you attended a foreign policy dinner in Washington. You exhorted the audience not to vote for Donald Trump, who was then a Republican candidate, offering to ban Muslims coming into the US. And you said, "For the life of me, I cannot believe that a country like the United States can afford to have someone as president who simply says these people are not going to be allowed to come to the United States." Any regrets about saying that now that he's president?
No, because I think since he's become president, he sort of modified his previous stance.
Well, he changes every day, doesn't he? Let's be honest. Did it not strike you as even slightly hypocritical that you, a former Saudi intelligence chief from a country where nobody has a say in who rules them, would come to the United States and recommend who they vote for as president and who they don't?
Well, if you're going to be an irascible interviewer, as you're indicating...
I'm very calm and very happy.
Your words are not so
here.
calm. But thank you for the opportunity to answer such questions. The kingdom's rulers are chosen by the people. There is a bay'ah process, which in Islamic tradition, the people of the country actually choose their rulers. And so the kingdom's rulers are not there by force. They're there by the will of the people.
So when the US State Department says in its latest report there is the lack of ability and legal means to choose their government in Saudi Arabia, restrictions on universal rights such as freedom of expression, the freedoms of assembly, association, movement, and religion, they're wrong?
Absolutely.
How could they get it so wrong? How could you be so misunderstood?
Well, you must put that question to them. We've had good relations with the United States for 80 years or so, and they know the country pretty well. And I would have hoped that they would be better informed than this report indicates.
Them and the human rights organizations, the international human rights organizations who reported earlier this year, Human Rights Watch, Saudi Arabia continued to repress pro-reform activists and peaceful dissidents. Over a dozen prominent activists in 2016 convicted on charges arising from their peaceful activities were serving long prison sentences.
Peaceful activities according to Human Rights Watch. But according to Saudi law, they contravened the law and therefore they received their punishment.
And the conclusion from these human rights organizations is that now you're stepping up what they call a ruthless crackdown against human rights activists.
Well, you must come and see for yourself.
Well, I doubt you take me to the prisons where they're being held, would you?
Well, the others have been taken to the prisons.
Yeah, they haven't left, have they? That's the problem.
Well, your reporters who have gone to the prisons have gone back and reported on them. Just refer back to a New York Times article of the visitor to the El Hayr prison, I think last year, and you'll get a better picture of how we treat our prisoners.
One of the latest victims, another human rights defender, was summoned for interrogation by your criminal investigation department in Mecca on the 8th of January this year, around 5 p.m., a man called Essam Koshak, according to Amnesty International. He arrived at the Al Mansour police station. He was detained. He hasn't been back home since. He was not allowed to appoint a lawyer in violation of basic norms of justice.
I contest that, because by law, everybody is allowed to get a lawyer and to have a fair hearing.
But he wasn't, according to Amnesty International.
According to Amnesty, but
yes.
That is not necessarily the truth.
But this is a respected organization. You say not necessarily the truth. It might well be the truth. You've never heard of people not being appointed a lawyer in Saudi Arabia?
Not since the law was passed allowing them to have lawyers.
So they're wrong. Everybody who criticizes Saudi Arabia is wrong.
Not everybody, but Amnesty definitely is. And
Amnesty, the State Department,
has historically had a view on Saudi Arabia which has been very negative.
And Human Rights Watch.
I call them actually Nasty International, not Amnesty International.
Even President Trump, I mean, he's already on record describing Saudi Arabia as the world's biggest funder of terrorism.
Well, I haven't heard him say that.
He's misinformed too.
I haven't heard him say that.
Why do you think there's even the slightest chance that you will be able to have meaningful discussions with him when he talks of you in that way? He doesn't seem to have adapted his point of view since taking office.
Well, that's for him to decide, not for me.
Hillary Clinton had the same view.
Hillary Clinton had the same view a few years back. I'm sure she's changed her opinion since then.
She hasn't said so.
Why don't you look at the U.S. Treasury Department's report on Saudi Arabia's efforts against terrorism, and you will see that they describe Saudi Arabia as the best partner in fighting terrorism.
So why in October last year a 2014 email from Hillary Clinton emerged in which she clearly stated that your country was involved in funding terrorism? What she said in that email to a private colleague was, we need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region. Well, why are you providing this?
The report of the Treasury Department succeeded that indication by Ms. Clinton, and it clearly defines Saudi Arabia as the best partner in the fight against terrorism and even against ISIL.
So in 2014 you were providing clandestine financial
No,
I
think Ms. Clinton was misinformed on that.
She was Secretary of State.
Well,
she had access to all the great raw material of intelligence.
Don't tell me the Secretaries of State don't make mistakes. Don't tell me they're not misinformed sometimes.
State Department's misinformed, the UN is misinformed, the international human rights people are misinformed, and I'm misinformed too.
Me. That's why I tell you, come and see for yourself. Why don't you answer me there?
Let's talk to some of the people who do come and see.
Why don't you come and see?
Well, the last time I tried to get into Saudi Arabia many years ago, I waited 2 years for a visa.
Many years ago.
So
why don't
I'm
you
not
try
so
it
young. I'm not so young that I have time.
Now?
That I have time to waste.
Many years ago are gone by. Come now and see for yourself.
Saudi Arabia sits on the Human Rights Council, much to the dismay of many countries around the world, and yet you are heavily criticized by the UN treaty body that monitors compliance with the Convention Against Torture, not least, I would add, for providing your second periodic report more than 10 years late in flagrant violation of your obligations. Why would you show the UN so little respect that you report 10 years late on the human rights situation?
Well, I'm not informed on that situation, so I can't tell you what the reasons for it were.
Well, why do you think? I mean, you know
I
the
have
country.
no idea.
You know the country better than anybody.
I will not presume to judge on something that I don't know about.
But you would agree.
But you're selecting bits and pieces from here and there.
Well, since we don't have 5 years to talk about the entire history of Saudi Arabia, one has to select. One has to select.
And what I'm telling you is this is something I'm not informed about.
But this doesn't seem to show much respect to the United Nations,
from your
does it?
point of view, I wonder what the other reporting of the United Nations about Saudi Arabia's conduct is.
The UN
Not the one that you selected, but the other things that they have said about Saudi Arabia.
Well, let's look at the UN.
Secretary General has just visited Saudi Arabia, and he's praised Saudi Arabia's cooperation with the United Nations on all aspects. Why don't you take his report and refer to it?
The last Secretary General didn't, did he?
Well, the last Secretary General is gone. This is the new Secretary General.
So you pick and choose your Secretaries General.
I don't pick them. It's the United States, the United Nations that does.
The ones you like and the ones you don't. The ones who lie and the ones who tell the truth.
The ones who are currently there now, they're praising Saudi Arabia.
Last June, the UN...
Why don't you mention what he said about Saudi Arabia?
Last June, the UN Committee Against Torture strongly criticized what it called Saudi reprisals against and harassment, intimidation and arrest of human rights defenders and journalists. But instead of taking the account of this criticism, you seem, as the human rights organization have said, to have stepped up your repression against these people. Why? Why?
You are as I said, selecting and choosing reports from here and there, and not referring to what the Secretary General himself said
What about the
about
Committee
Saudi
Against
Arabia.
Torture?
What about the Secretary General himself?
That's not an answer. That's not an answer. With great respect, Your Royal Highness, it's not an answer to the criticisms.
Why don't you take his word?
Because this is the organization.
He is the Secretary General who's in charge of these committees and so on, and he has made these comments about Saudi. Why don't you refer to them?
And he hasn't studied your compliance.
How do you know he hasn't studied them? Were you there with him?
UN Committee Against Torture has studied what's going on in your country.
And the Secretary General has not.
So you regret.
So the Secretary General has not studied.
And you reject what they say. Detailed criticism by the Committee Against Torture. A number of your punishments, they say, are in direct breach of the convention that you signed in 1997. Corporal punishment, flogging, lashing, amputation of limbs. Why do you sign binding international agreements if you don't intend to abide by them?
We abide by all the agreements that we have signed.
But
if there is somebody who's saying that, you come and see for yourself, and then you can make a judgment.
This is the UN Committee Against Torture. They are required, under the terms of the agreement, to monitor your compliance with it. Why are they lying too?
You tell me.
Well, they're not, are they? They're clearly not.
I have no idea.
They're clearly not. You don't know what the situation in Saudi Arabia is?
The Human Rights Commissioner has visited Saudi Arabia many times. Why don't you read his reports or her reports?
I'm giving you reports. The lashing of the blogger Raif Badawi, now halfway through a 10-year sentence, produced an international outcry. But here again, you ignored the concerns of the UN Committee Against Torture. You failed to provide information about this case, despite both written and oral requests by that Committee Against Torture, which again pointed out that lashing constitutes torture under the Convention. Why do you not even answer the queries of the UN Committee Against Torture?
Well, you know, Mr. Sebastian, I stressed you must come and see for yourself before you take these things as being facts. Just come and see. Why don't you agree to that? Why won't you commit yourself to that?
Because it's much better that the experts go and
it's
see.
better that you yourself.
Oh, it's much better that somebody who knows nothing, about the internal workings.
Instead of selecting bits and pieces from here and there, come for yourself and see.
You'd love to have somebody there who doesn't know his way around Saudi Arabia,
Why?
Who doesn't speak Arabic, because you can tell him anything.
Bring whoever you want.
Tell him anything.
Bring whoever you want with you.
Well, I'd bring the UN Committee Against Torture, but you don't seem to want them, do you?
You bring whatever you want.
You don't seem to want them.
I am telling you, you can bring anybody you want. You come as my guest.
I don't think you're interested in improving human rights in Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's your opinion.
If you were, you would have granted operating licenses.
That is your opinion.
It's the opinion of human rights community.
That is
because if you were, you would have granted operating licenses to human rights organizations.
There are human rights organizations in Saudi Arabia operating. There is a government human rights operation, and there is an independent one. Why don't these people who want to join the human rights call join this group?
And what about the ones at which the committee, the UN, has expressed concern that you've closed them down? The Saudi Arabian Civil and Political Rights Association, for instance, suspended. Almost all of its founding members are in jail, Your Royal Highness.
You say
now.
Almost. Who is in jail for that? Give me names.
I will give you names. We'll give you them from Amnesty International, but this is what they report. And Human Rights Watch. The Adala Center for Human Rights, also suspended or closed down. The Union for Human Rights, the Monitor for Human Rights in Saudi Arabia. Why? Why? The Committee Against Torture said it was extremely concerned that your country had refused to grant operating licenses to these groups.
The Human Rights Society in Saudi Arabia operates under the law of Saudi Arabia, and it meets all of the requirements in any international agreements. They visit prisons, they receive complaints, they make complaints, they operate independently of the government. They are the ones that you should address these questions to, not me.
With respect, that's not the view of the UN Committee Against Torture.
Well, with respect, that's perhaps what they should be doing.
Let's look, if we may, at your military action, or military action of your coalition in Yemen. Last July, two of the human rights groups that you don't like called for Saudi suspension from the Human Rights Council. They accused you of failing to conduct credible, impartial and transparent investigations into possible war crimes by your coalition forces in Yemen, and said you'd used your position on the council to effectively call to block the creation of an independent international investigation. Why would you do that?
You know, it is not just Saudi Arabia on that commission.
I understand that.
There are other countries that supported the view that it is the Yemeni government's responsibility to undertake these operations, and we will be helping them along with the Human Rights Commission.
But you were we
did not stop anybody from expressing their views. The views were expressed. We by ourselves cannot change other people's views on that committee.
But you were
Everybody expressed themselves, but the majority of the people there decided that Saudi view that it is the Yemeni government who should be investigating these issues was correct.
You were also accused of pressuring the previous UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon after the UN put you on its so-called list of shame and said that the coalition was responsible for 60% of the child deaths and injuries in Yemen in 2015.
The Secretary General himself retracted that.
He said under pressure.
How can Saudi Arabia by herself pressure the Secretary General?
By threatening to withdraw money from humanitarian programs.
We never did.
He says you did. He said there was unacceptable and undue pressure. Ban Ki-moon said that.
When did he say that? I never saw that statement by Ban Ki-moon myself.
We'll show it to you.
Yeah, please do.
He said there was unacceptable and undue pressure and said children already at risk in Palestine, South Sudan, Syria, Yemen, and so many other places would fall further into despair.
Well, that's quoted as being said by Ban Ki-moon. Yes. I have never seen that statement by Ban Ki-moon.
Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs that you from time to time have addressed, and even your embassy has put money into the funding of this organization. It says this isn't the first time the Saudis have applied pressure to the UN to limit criticism of their actions, especially in Yemen. The problem is that rather than improving their image, it has only reinforced the idea that they use the bully pulpit of their money to get what they want. Well, this is an organization you respect.
Well, Chatham
House, you fund, even.
Chatham House has made many statements on other issues as well. Saudi Arabia has never stopped funding any humanitarian effort by the United Nations. On the contrary, Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest...
No, it threatened to. We're talking about its threats.
Let me just finish. Don't interrupt me. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest funders of all humanitarian efforts in the United Nations, on food, on refugees, on all of the humanitarian aspects of the United Nations. We have never stopped funding any of these efforts by the United Nations, unlike some other countries.
So I
deny that we ever used any pressure or that we ever suspended any financing to any of these humanitarian efforts.
When we look at your denials, we had denials for weeks on end last year that Saudi Arabia was using, and the coalition were using, British-made cluster bombs in Yemen, despite being shown photos of them both by Amnesty International and British television. And we had last November Major General Ahmed Asseri speaking for the coalition, dismissing the claim, saying, this is manipulation. This is what we face in the media. People manipulate these kinds of photos. If we used it, we'd say we used it. Why would we deny it? So a fully fledged denial from the spokesman. A month later, without even a blush, same general suddenly announces, December 19th last year, the Saudi-led coalition would cease use of British cluster munitions. So one moment it's the big, we're being manipulated, and the next moment, okay, yeah, we'll stop using.
Yeah, well...
So the denials are worth nothing, are they?
If he admitted to their use and in those words, then that is for the general to do that.
Yes. One moment it's one truth and the next is the other. I thought that it was in America that we got alternative facts. We seem to be getting them out of your coalition as well.
Well, you know,
alternative facts. A different day, a different fact.
They're not invented by Saudi Arabia, you know.
You have said...
You look at your own country's alternative facts.
Well, we'll talk to our own politicians about
Well,
our own alternative facts, but I'm talking to you about yours.
Well,
I'm talking,
so all countries
and grateful to have you here, Your Royal Highness. Grateful to have you here.
You're not showing any gratitude.
We have different ways of doing so. In March last year, you told the world, we combat extremist ideology that attempts to hijack our religion on all levels. And you do some combating. I'm sure you've sacked plenty of imams putting out extremist comments. But it should be a huge embarrassment to Saudi Arabia that the so-called Islamic State, and you don't get much more extreme than that, adopted official Saudi textbooks for its schools until it published its own in 2015. And a former imam of the Grand Mosque in Mecca actually admitted it when he said, this is Sheikh Adil Al-Kabani. He declared with regret in an interview last January that IS leaders draw their ideas from what is written in our own books, our Saudi books, our own principles.
You know,
isn't that a matter of shame?
No, it is not. Saudi books can be used by anybody. If IS use them to promote what they're doing, the kingdom fights IS on every level. On the military level, we just arrested a group of them yesterday. I'm sure you've seen it in the news in Saudi Arabia. We fight their ideology. We publicly denounce their executions and their practices. So we have no need to be ashamed of our position on IS whatsoever. If IS uses books from Saudi schools, they could just as well have used books from British schools or from something else to teach. Yeah, well,
this is an organization that brutalizes and enslaves women, tortures, murders.
The books that come out of the Saudi educational system do not promote the torture and the persecution of women or whoever you want to describe. You look at the books themselves. So well, if they use them, that's for them to decide upon. It's not a means by which to designate Saudi Arabia as being IS.
Well, in 2013, a State Department contractor did look at your books and completed a study of the official textbooks.
Which contractor?
The International Center for Religion and Diplomacy. Yeah. You heard of them. Turned out that some bigoted, violent contact had been removed, but there was plenty that remained. 7th graders were taught that fighting the infidels to elevate the words of Allah was among the deeds that Allah loved most. 4th graders read that non-Muslims had been shown the truth but abandoned it, like the Jews, or had replaced truth with ignorance, like the Christians. You think that's acceptable? Well, to be put in your textbooks and distributed around the world that promotes understanding?
I wonder what textbooks in other countries say about things like that.
We're talking to you about the textbooks that are in Saudi Arabia.
It's a blanket accusation against Saudi Arabia when other places as well use means by which they promote their own ideas and their own sometimes negative and bigoted ideas. So it's something that we are working on, and as you admit, we have eliminated some of the things in the textbooks, and we're in the process of doing the others, but it takes time, and we're in the process of doing them.
You've been willingly putting out this hate speech for years, haven't you? You've been distributing it around the world.
You have to review all of the pages and the sentences and so on and clean them. And that's what Saudi Arabia is doing.
So why were they being put out in the first place, this hate speech? Why were you doing that for 20-odd years?
Not 20-odd years, maybe even longer. But the idea here is that we're improving ourselves and we're eliminating these things from our textbooks. That's what you should be concentrating on instead of saying, why are they there in the first place?
But we're always told things are getting better, reforms are happening. I've been told this for the last 30 years by people from your country.
I keep telling you.
And nothing gets any better. According to the human rights groups, it's getting worse.
I'm just telling you, these human rights groups have an agenda against us.
They know nothing.
No, it's not that they don't know. I think they're specifically targeting Saudi Arabia because we're a country that follows Islam, because we're a country that that believes in God, because we are a monarchy, because we are all the things that these human rights groups
other countries
find fault with.
Other countries that have Islam as its religion and are peaceful countries and in the same situation as yours are not criticized in the same way for massive and rampant
because Saudi
repression
Arabia
of human rights.
is the most important Muslim country in the world, and that's why it is targeted, because of the two holy places in it and because of the pilgrims that come there. So it's an easy target for these people that don't want to have religion, that don't want to have a monarchy, that don't want to have a belief in God, etc.
Your Royal Highness.
And I keep telling you, come and visit and see for yourself.
Your Royal Highness, thank you very much for being on Complex Zone.